Hello, and welcome back to day 12 of 100 Days of Clarity. Today, we're going to continue building off the knowledge that we've built up so far. Specifically, we're actually going to introduce a new type of data type, and not just a new data type, but a new data type that is more complex than any of the ones we've seen before. And so before, while we introduced either the primitive data types or the wrapped data types, so again, either an optional or a response, both the wrapped data types also only allowed us to work with one data type at a time, right? We only wrapped one principal, or we only wrapped one number, or we only wrapped one string. Same with optionals. However, as you could probably guess somewhere along the road, instead of just working with simple primitives, there's a way to work by mixing those primitives to make much more complex, robust, and useful data types. Today, we're going to cover the first of those data types called a tuple. A tuple is a data type that lives within two brackets that has a key and that has multiple key and values separated by a comma. And so, again, we're not going to talk too much about it. It's much cleaner to just go ahead and start writing examples. So please open up the IDE, open up the terminal, and let's start commenting in. So we picked up where we last left off, line 60s, comment in day 12, tuples. Tuples, and we're also going to introduce something called merge or merging, and it's actually how tuples are updated. And this is a little bit of a caveat and nuance that I'm going to reiterate multiple times during this video. One, tuples themselves, once created, are fixed and immutable and cannot be changed, right? So if you write a tuple, you cannot get one property of it and then update that one property, or update, multiple of the properties. However, using merge, what you can do is you can merge together one tuple with some key value pairs and another tuple and a second tuple with key value pairs, and the second tuple will overwrite any values that have the same key in the first tuple that was provided. So merge is a way to pseudo update tuples, but for your knowledge, it's important to know the distinction that tuples themselves are immutable, cannot be updated, but they can be overridden using merge. So that being said, let's go ahead and, as usual, start very simple with the define read only function that allows us to just simply read a tuple. Okay, so tuple, body, enter, and then we're going to go ahead and indent. Okay, cool. So to define a tuple, you actually just have to write out the brackets and the key value pairs inside. For this first example, let's say we're building a very simple smart contract where we just want to keep track of a user, their principal, a name they provide, and a balance. So let's say we're building a very simple wallet smart contract or something of that sort. So read tuple, again, instead of parentheses now, whenever we write a tuple, we use brackets, and then key value pairs. So the key is just an English word you use that you're going to use to refer to the value that it has to the right of it. So in our example, let's go ahead and first write user. And here, all we're going to do is just copy paste a principal address that we have. And actually, since we don't have one on hand, I'm going to go back to Clarinet console and run it and just grab one of the principals that we see there. So cd documents, cd github, cd documents, cd github, cd clarity practice, cd 100 days of clarity v clarinet console. Okay, cool. As we can see, all we're looking for is one address here. Let's copy paste this guy because we're gonna save a literal principal. Uncomment this again because yeah. And by the way, if you didn't uncomment that and you tried running the clarinet console to get an address, that would have crashed and well, it wouldn't have worked, and it wouldn't have worked because that function was clearly incomplete. So user, okay. Let's call this first property user principal. User principal is the key name, and now what are we assigning as the value? Well, just a principal for now. Little side rule that takes some time to getting used to. Whenever you use a literal principal, how we're doing here, you need to use an apostrophe before. So like that. And you can see we can save that. If we didn't have the apostrophe, it actually would give us an error and you would have been very frustrated trying to figure out why. So apostrophe, again, a tuple is useful for mixing multiple primitives. So here we're going to go ahead, comma, add another key value pair. So let's call this, again, we want to keep track of a username. So username. Here, really simple, just write any name that you want. Then again, comma. And for this tuple, we're going to leave it with 3 key value pairs, user principal, username, and user balance. Which user balance will obviously be some uint. Again, since we're saving something literal, we have to put in an exact uint. Okay, cool. So there we have a tuple. It's a tuple that has fixed properties for all the values, but it's a tuple nonetheless with 3 key value pairs. And if we go back to clarinet console and we again do our thing, we can see that it compiles correctly or builds correctly. Sorry, the environment builds correctly. And then from here, we can go ahead. I'm going to move this a little bit. We can go ahead, and since we're still in Clarity Basics 2, call read tuple. Okay, and we see user balance U10, username set Zeus, user principal. And now I actually want to compare what we got to what we wrote because it's going to bring up another key part of tuples. So notice that in the function we wrote, lines 68 through 70, we wrote in the order user principal, username, user balance. But the tuple we returned, it actually returned it in a different order. It returned user balance, username, user principal. So tuples are not for iterating over. They are not to use, with list functions or anything like that. You cannot iterate over them because there is no guarantee that they'll come back in the same order. So, want to make that clear. Tuples, you don't want to use them to iterate over things. You want to use them when you don't have to worry about the order of those properties that are returned. So, now that we have this part done, read tuple, now we're just going to create another tuple. Now we're going to create another read tuple, except we're going to pass parameters. So again, just working and compounding our knowledge a little bit. Let's call this one read tuple 1. And yeah, define read only. Actually, we're going to have to write a define public function. And again, ties back into last lesson. If we just want to read something, we can use define read only. The moment we need to write to anything in the smart contract, we need to have a response, which means we need to use a define public function. So since we're writing this time, define public, let's call this write tuple 1. And let's provide 3 parameters. 1 parameter for each property in the tuple that we had above. So let's say user principal, which we know will be a principal. And let's call these parameters new everything. So new user principal. New user balance. And new username. Okay, and then for the body, you can just go ahead and copy paste the last tuple, except you're obviously going to replace all the hard-coded values. You're going to replace them with the parameters that we've just implemented. So user principal, go ahead and change that for new user principal. Username, we'll change that to new username. And new balance, we can call this new user balance. And we got an error. Okay, and why did we get an error? Oh, and the message says it exactly. Public functions must return an expression of type response. Again, an OK. This is a write function where we are not returning a response. So of course it's failing. So all we do is wrap the last line of our function with the response, in this case, OK, and that fixes it. So now we can go back and test out this function. And again, I just want to make it clear. Right now, we are not saving anything, right? Like this tuple is only created during this function and read back during this function. So with that in mind, let's write tuple 1. We know we have 3 parameters, and yeah, let's copy paste one address from here, a different one. Remember, don't forget the apostrophe or else Clarinet will yell at you and you won't know why. Principal, a new username, let's call this person Jordan, and then new user balance. So let's go ahead and give a balance of U20. We now have our function name, our 3 parameters. If we go ahead and run this, okay, we get an OK response back with a tuple that has the 3 parameters we provided. User balance, U20, username, Jordan, user principal, the principal we copy pasted. Beautiful. Okay, so you now know how to read and write to a tuple. And again, it's really, really not that foreign or not that complicated, because you're now coming in with the knowledge of what the primitive data types are. And you can see why, if we wanted to create anything that resembles real life data, we need to be able to mix tuples, or we need to be able to keep track of primitives together, of different primitives. And the best way to do that is with tuples. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and now review the merge function that we talked about in the beginning, which allows you to, again, overwrite values in a tuple. And we're just going to practice by writing 3 functions, actually 4 functions. And we're going to do this pretty fast compared to our usual pace. We're going to write 4 functions, 3 functions that allow us to update just one of the properties of our tuple. And then let's say 1 function that updates everything at once. Okay. And actually, we're gonna compound knowledge from our previous lesson, and we're actually gonna save our tuple as, we're gonna create a variable that'll save our tuple. That way we can just use var get when merging. Okay, so first let's just define our tuple here. Let's call it example tuple or original tuple. Just original. Type, again, so the type of this tuple is going to be what we've been doing so far. So I'm actually just going to copy paste this guy and place it here for type. And again, it's not asking us for specific variables. It's asking us, it's not asking us for literal keys or values. We need to write in the types here. So this first type we know is a principal. The second type we know is a string. And this last type we know is a uint. Okay, now that we've defined our tuple, which we've named original, we need to provide an original value to our original tuple, just like we would when defining any other data or any other variable. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to go ahead and provide I'm just going to copy paste what we had in read tuple 1 and just use that as our original example. Again, this line is obviously getting hairy, and whenever that happens, I just make sure I give myself more room to understand exactly what it is we're working with. Okay, and if you press save, you can go ahead and see this works. We now created a variable tuple called original that holds the same 3 properties we practiced with. So again, now we're going to fly through. We're going to write 4 different functions. And again, the first 3 are going to be changing one property of the tuple or merging one property. The last example is going to show merging all of them at once. So first one, we're probably going to write slow and then get faster and faster. So define public. This one we're going to call merge principal. And so very clearly, this one is only going to update the principal. So let's call this variable new user principal. And again, what type is it? Well, it's a principal. And go to body, enter. And again, we know we're going to use a merge function. So here, you can see that I'm typing in merge and it's filling in. As you can see by the preview there, merge takes in 2 parameters, as we discussed, the first tuple and the second tuple. Again, the second tuple overwrites the first tuple wherever it can. Obviously not all keys and values, but any keys that are the same, the second tuple overwrites the first tuple. Okay, and again, tuples are ugly, and well, they're ugly because they're verbose. So this is a perfect example of where I would absolutely indent before starting anything. So we're going to go ahead and again, we need to merge our first tuple, which is our original tuple, right? So let's go ahead and grab that. And we called our original tuple original. So let's go and grab it using var set. So var set original. Oh, sorry, var get original. Wow, syntax errors here. Okay, var get original. And now, well, what do we want to merge, or what property do we want to update? We only want to update the user principal property of this tuple. So we only need to write that key value pair in. For example, public functions. Okay. Once again, I was looking at that error thinking, what did we do wrong with the actual function? As you can see, by hovering over, we again just forgot to wrap this in an OK message because we are writing to the contract. We changed that to OK, and now works. Yeah, I realized in order to make sure that we're updating correctly, we're going to need a quick define read only function that just reads back our original tuple, or the one that should be updated. So let's go ahead and write super simple define read only function that we'll be calling read original. And then again, this is literally only going to return original. So we can just use var get original. Okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and just fly through the next 2 merge functions that would update one at a time, because again, the patterns are very much the same. So define public. Merge username. Obviously new username. We want this to be the same type, so string-ascii 24. And then for the body, here I'm going to copy paste lines 91 through 94, because again, the only thing that's different here is instead of updating one key, we want to update the other key, which is username. And obviously the parameter was changed to new username as well. And if we press Control S, you can see that that will save, and that did work. Cool. And so let's go ahead and do one more function here with the same pattern. So we're going to update only one key value pair in our original tuple. And actually, before we do that, let's test everything's working so far. Control C, clarinet console. Again, the name of our function to make sure everything is working is simply read original. So we're first going to read original, update it, and then update it, read it, and then update it again and read it. So read original. Okay, there's our original tuple. We're now going to call merge principal and pass in a new principal. Which we're just copying from above. Okay, and if we see our tuple here, we now see user balance U10, username set Zeus, but the user principal was updated and only the user principal. We're going to go ahead and now update. Now we're going to go ahead and use the merge username function to test that we can update this property. Pass in the name of Jordan, and we see that our tuple did get updated with only the username key. With that being said, I realize that we've now gone on for 21 minutes, which is, again, very, very north of how long I want these to go. So I am not going to show you guys the last example of using merge new balance, because I hope you guys can figure that out yourselves. But I will just end up by doing a merge all function. So let's go back to our contract. Let's just call this merge all. And actually, we're just going to pull in all the parameters that we had in write tuple 1, because they actually already have the key names we'd like to use, which is new user principal and new blah blah and new etc. So I'm just going to go ahead here, copy paste here, and now for the bottom here. So actually, I'm actually going to copy paste exactly what we had in line 74 through 78, because that is what we're doing. We're now merging and updating this entire tuple at once. So sorry, the OK should not be there. And there we go. As you can see, that's saved correctly, which means if we run this in Clarinet, it will indeed work. I'm not going to go ahead and do that now, because again, this video has gone on for much longer than I wanted. But I hope it was extremely useful for you. As you can likely see, any real work we're going to do in contracts, and in general, most of the work we're going to do moving forward, doesn't rely on only one primitive or two primitives or something of that sort. You're going to see tuples over and over and over and over again, because it is how we can use multiple primitives to represent a more complex data type. In addition, we learned merge and how you can't, and how once you write a tuple, you cannot update that tuple. You can, however, overwrite it if you use something with the same keys. With that being said, thank you for your time, and we will be back tomorrow.